Hey friends, it's Sunday night, so that means it's time for another Savvy Chat. I'm your host, Jen Horenjeff with Savvy Cooperative, and today we're talking about Savvy's core value of choosing integrity. And I'm not sure if one is supposed to have a favorite core value, but for me, this is it. And I think that this is going to be a really awesome discussion about why we need to actually choose our integrity and what we're doing. And I am so excited to be joined by Peter Liu from Collectively, and he is going to share some of his perspective on kind of how he's put that into his life and his career. And he's got an awesome background for us to really kind of dig into this because he's the co-founder of Collectively, but prior to that, he was at Techstars, so he knows all about sort of the startup and entrepreneur scene, and he's been a user experience designer and web developer, so he's kind of seen a lot of kind of the industry. So let's get ready to dive in. So Peter, say hello and tell us where you're calling in from tonight.
Hey everyone, I am calling in from Brooklyn, from the neighborhood of Flatbush.
Ah, fabulous. We've had some New Yorkers recently, and I myself am also in New York, but we're not together at the moment. So, well, this is awesome. And, I know that when I approached you about doing this, I think this really resonated with you about talking about integrity. And so before we kind of dive into kind of thinking about that, let's kind of set the stage first. And I'd love for you to tell people about Collectively and just what do you guys do?
Yes, absolutely. So Collectively is a digital product studio and innovation partner for mission-driven entrepreneurs, helping them build businesses and technologies that create a more sustainable, equitable, and inclusive future. That's a lot to absorb, but really we help entrepreneurs that are focused on creating social enterprises and nonprofits figure out how to build technology that actually matters and creates an impact.
That's awesome. And obviously that's something that I feel very passionate about. So, we're talking about integrity today. And I'm just curious, to you, kind of what does that mean? Not necessarily from a definition, but just to you, and what's your gut sense of integrity?
Yeah. I don't want to echo too much of the latest Nike ad, but I would say that's definitely one of the simplest ways to put it is to really do things that you stand for and believe in, even if it doesn't make sense for you right now and it makes you feel uncomfortable and it's an inconvenience for you, to really make your decisions based on the values that you have and the reasons why you do what you do. And for me specifically, it's just such a simple value that I have of treating people the way that I would deserve, what I'd ideally like to be treated. And that's difficult just given the endless amounts of decisions that we have to make every day. So that for me is how I would define integrity and the value that I hold most closely when I'm thinking about integrity.
Yeah, and I mean, this is why I was so excited to talk about this because we actually met at a conference. I think it was a social impact conference, and I heard you telling your story about why you decided to found Collectively. So why don't you share sort of that journey with us? Because I think that really speaks to this idea of integrity.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think when people ask me the story, I have had some time to actually think more about this and why I do what I do. And it really starts more in college. I've always been someone who's tried a lot of different things, but I think the biggest things that I've done while in college were to start an organization called HackBU, which was focused on helping computer science students and people who are interested in programming get access to hackathons, to mentors, and to build really awesome stuff. I was also an intern at the Center for Civic Engagement on campus. So they focused on organizing all of the fundraisers, being connected to the nonprofits at Binghamton, and engaging a lot of the volunteers on campus. And the last organization that I was part of was called Enactus, and that was focused on social entrepreneurship from a local community standpoint and helping the community of Binghamton and its students figure out how do you build social enterprises. So all three of those things have really been in my life for the last 2 years. But I started out as a designer and developer working at a small agency, doing a lot of web design, graphic design, and web development for anywhere from a small business to nonprofits to really large brands. And through that time, it was really awesome to just learn a lot about different types of projects and doing really great things. But at the end of the day, we were doing work with clients that we just sent off and we never finished. And we were doing work with clients that didn't necessarily align with my values. And really all of our work was really focused on was helping other clients make more money. So I got a little burnt out from that. I left, went back to school, sort of tried to figure out what I was doing with my set of skills. At some point decided I wanted to try being a journalist. And then I didn't. And sort of this all was happening in the year 2016. Which I think was a pretty pivotal year for most people considering the presidential election. And where I was trying to understand where I fit was how does tech fit into the world, not just of the high growth startup world where you're building a ton of apps to then go out and get a ton of fundraising, but where does it fit for people who are interested from a political organizing background or from working in sustainable farming? How does tech fit into that world? And how do we help entrepreneurs that are non-technical, that are focused on creating impactful models, build technology that helps them do that? So since we've started, I started with two other co-founder, one who's a UX designer and the other is a software engineer. And where we saw ourselves fitting was being that CTO, that product team for entrepreneurs that were really interested in building technology that mattered. So for the last 2 years, we've been working with a ton of different entrepreneurs, building digital products, figuring out what, how do we bring it to people? How do we design with people to make sure that they understand how to use the product? And how do we make sure that it's aligned with our mission and our values as a company?
Yeah, I mean, and that I think that's just fantastic. And of course, we really care about user-centered design over here at Savvy. And what I've even noticed just being in the tech space is that, my gosh, like web developers and organizations like yourself at Collectively are in super high demand. Everyone needs that tech person or that guidance to figure out how to bring their vision to life, especially for people who are non-technical. And so I guess my question is, the fact that your profession is in such in high demand, why limit yourself then to just social enterprises or nonprofits? Why are you thinking that that's the way to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to give you credit for adding this word to my vocabulary the other week, but the first thing that I really started to notice in the tech startup world was people creating frivolous startups.
I like that word.
Yes, I definitely give you credit, and I got that from you. But really, in the tech startup world that I was in, especially in a city like New York, where it's a pretty wealthy city, and the set of problems that a standard, middle class New Yorker has aren't too large. There's already a million startups trying to tackle how do I get food delivered faster to my door? How do I get the exact food that fits my flavor profile to my door? And on the other end of it, I started meeting more and more nonprofits who were still trying to figure out how to get a relationship management system up or get a blog up. So the reason that we sort of focused on helping social enterprises and nonprofits is that the work is pretty much the same regardless of the context. We're still doing the same work. We're still developing websites. We're still dealing with occasionally difficult clients. But at the end of the day, if you know that you're building something and you're contributing to something that you believe in versus having gone through all of that and knowing at the end of the day you're building a small website for a corporate client who might be destroying the planet, that's the reason why we do the things that we do. And for the most part, it's sort of the way that we also think about it too is Peter Thiel, who's sort of one of the co-founders of PayPal. Personally, I have a lot of issues with Peter Thiel, but there are a ton of issues with Peter Thiel. The one thing that I appreciate by Peter Thiel is the sort of telling entrepreneurs to not think of 1 to n problems of how do we incrementally, make cars slightly faster or to make food delivery more accessible, but from 0 to 1. So thinking about what systemic issues don't have solutions right now. What widespread systemic issues don't have solutions now? How do you build a product? How do you build technology that is the one startup, the one company that's focused on really solving that issue? And not just being that one startup, but being, a part of that movement of thinking about how do we solve issues from a larger point of view outside of the context of just our own personal issues.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a great way of thinking about it too. Like, what's that big problem that hasn't been addressed? It's not being solved. And so, I mean, the reality is that, oops, I feel a little bit of echo. Do you hear that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure it's on my broadcast. But yeah, we're coming back to it and thinking about the fact that you really want to help these companies that are doing social impact. But if there is more and more money being pumped into tech, people ultimately are going to need your services even more. So it is plausible that somebody might come to you tomorrow or in a month from now or a year from now and offer you a big check to be able to build them an app that, I don't know, takes people's data and sends it to Russia, or sell something, maybe less overtly like bad, but it's still a little iffy. So in those cases, like, what do you do? How do you weigh that out? And how do you evaluate which companies to work with? Because it can just be not quite as black and white.
Yeah. It's funny. I've been asked this question before, and to be honest, it always depends. I am always willing to have a conversation with no set agenda at the end of it. So a lot of the like I will meet with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I will have only heard one or two sentences about what they do. I am more than happy to get coffee with them for half an hour and ask them about their company to hear about it, because a lot of the times we enter conversations with only our preconceived notions of what they're talking about. So if someone says, we are pro-gun, to immediately I have these preconceived notions of what pro-guns means, that it's a group of people who are very focused on legalizing assault rifles. That might not be the case, but that's what I assume it is. The only way for me to find that out is to actually go and talk to this person and hear them out. So that's sort of, the first step of it. But overall, I've had so many conversations with entrepreneurs, and at the end of that conversation, I knew it wasn't the right fit. So now I've fortunately gotten a little bit better. It's sort of like dating a lot of the times, but just being able to ask the right questions and knowing sort of the telltale signs that they aren't a right fit for our mission, what we do. The number one question I always ask is why they started their company and how they got here. If the whole story is about how they came up with this incredible idea and how they were the one person who thinks that they're the only person who's going to be able to do this, that's usually one sign. And during those conversations, a lot of times we'll bring our team members. And I'm usually that person that has met them the first time. I look at how they treat our team members. I look at how they address people that we work with, who we hold really closely, who are eventually going to work with them. If they treat them with sort of disrespect, again, not aligned with how we like to do things. And I think a lot also has to do with how they operate their company and how they work with people. It's one thing to make sure that your company is focused on solving a very important problem. It's another thing when you're solving that problem in a way that isn't fair to the people that you work with. So if you're a founder who goes on Fiverr to try to get someone to design you a logo for $15, that's not a thing that we look at fairly, because we care about paying workers a decent wage, because we would also like to be paid a decent wage by a client. So it's also not just them having this big vision and this big problem, but how do they go about trying to solve it? Do they do it with other people? Are they willing to hear the other side of things? Yeah, and the last thing, just sort of a funnier thing that I noticed from having these conversations, is that we always include the fact that we work with mission-driven founders, and as loosely as that defines the type of work that these founders do. Usually, after I say that, the founder who asking them why they started, throughout that entire conversation of asking them why they started, and doesn't mention their mission at all, they will immediately say, oh, we're trying to do impact. We donate to nonprofits. We might donate 1% of our profits to a foundation. So they get very defensive when I say that, we work with mission-driven founders, and they're like, oh, how do I fit into this mold now of being a mission-driven founder?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Wow, you touched on so many I think, interesting ways to get at the heart of that. And especially as somebody who has to kind of be that detective to, weigh out if people are mission driven or not. I think even just what you said about bringing your colleagues in and seeing, do they have manners and do they treat people respectfully? A lot of the time, I guess maybe I think it's because either I'm a patient or I'm a woman. I just feel like people will just completely disregard. They don't even make eye contact. You're not worth their time. So that certainly resonates. And I'm sure even our patients who are listening, even though if you're talking about it in sort of a work relationship, the patients are thinking about this in maybe a doctor and patient relationship, or just interacting within the system in general, or maybe even talking to family members or friends about their condition, and just not feeling like they're being treated fairly, and seeing how people behave when you open up and you're a little bit more vulnerable. I'm sure that that is something that our members can certainly empathize with on kind of a different level. So that's really interesting that you say it that way. And I think all the kind of stuff that you're talking about is really what it comes down to, is that there are these little things, these little signals that we just have to be attuned to. And then the next part is, well, what do you do? And so that's the whole thing that we specifically, when we formed our core values, as informed by our members, we chose the word choose integrity, because we do believe that it's a choice that you have to do over and over and over and over and over again. And, even before the call, you and I were talking about how earlier today, I noticed that Airbnb had just announced that they're trying to see if the SEC will allow their hosts, their Airbnb hosts, to be able to get some equity in the company. And how would that, be able to fit into their model? What does that look like? We're talking about hosts that maybe have been taken advantage of before. Why do they want to be working at this company that doesn't respect them? And so now the company's taking a step towards doing that. And while they weren't founded as a co-op, that wasn't like the intention. It's just like, how do you maintain the integrity of your business as it's growing? And so, what you touched on, I think, is really important there. And as somebody who's seen tons of examples of different companies, it's kind of, you probably see them start off on the right path and then get swayed a little bit as they, want to make more money, or, find the next shiny object, or an investor or another external force kind of forces them to do so. Where have you seen those sort of examples? Like, can you give us any way of looking at that? It doesn't have to be healthcare. I know that's not necessarily your sphere, but where have we seen that in sort of the tech ecosystem?
Yeah. I would definitely say from the only story that I could tell was sort of my own, well enough, and it was sort of one of the first jobs that I got was working at an agency, and the reason that the founders had started the company was because they had previously been founders of a tech startup, and they had worked with a ton of different vendors who were not transparent, who didn't give them what they paid for and what they delivered, and eventually got screwed over. So their point in starting the company was to be that resource for founders like them, to be fair, to be transparent, to be clear about their work. They, at some point, they built their network, they got pretty well known, and we were starting to land bigger projects with bigger names of clients. So financially speaking, it was a really good thing for the company, where we were able to get opportunities with larger brands that we would not have been able to a year ago. During that time, I had been working with them to figure out their branding, to figure out their core message, to figure out what sort of the direction of that brand and what it would look like was. So naturally, throughout the entire branding process, I tried to get the founders to talk about why they started their company and what kind of impact they're looking to have in the world. And repeated, it's such a simple question not a simple question, but it's a question that if you've really thought about it, you can answer pretty clearly, is why this company was started, or why does your company exist? And all I kept hearing was, we just want to make money, which, wasn't the original reason that they started this company. It was not what they had told me. It's not what they had told other clients. But as soon as we got to the nitty-gritty of me trying to get that out of them, all I can hear over and over again was to make money, to get bigger clients, to get more brand names in our portfolio. And that's, my own professional experience, my own personal example of a company, being thrown so many different messages and so many different opportunities without really thinking about which ones made sense and which ones aligned with the original reason that we had started our company. And it had gotten to the point where, again, it was all focused on profit and not really focused on actually doing what we set out to do.
Yeah, and I think this came up in one of our other chats about Theranos, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but in the healthcare world we are, about another startup that really just faked all of their information and kept leading everybody on, and they had no product, and they just very fraudulent in what they were doing. And that's terrible. But like, yeah, you just end up kind of going down this path, and then you just end up in this vortex. And so it's kind of like, what they say, when you start lying, you just have to keep kind of lying and lying and lying and lying to kind of cover up everything. I wonder if you've seen that.
Yeah. And I've definitely seen this on a smaller the less involved with my own professional experience, but with a lot of the startups that I've worked with. I previously worked at Techstars, and at the end of most accelerator programs, there's a demo day where you talk about how awesome you are in front of a room of your investors, your friends, your family. And for someone who had been working directly with these group of startups for the last 3 to 4 months, I knew exactly where they were within their product. I knew exactly where they were within their business. I knew what they were doing every day. But there's this pressure, this like unnecessary pressure to get out there on demo day and frankly to bullshit, to talk about yourself as if you've done all these things that me personally, I knew for a fact that weren't done, but it's because the expectation was so high that they felt this ridiculous pressure to show investors and to all these people that in the last 3 months, I've done things that would take a year to do, because they literally take a year to do. So those are, other examples of companies that I've seen, start off, but, have to tell this other story and then eventually have to do that other story to actually live it out.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, you're just kind of hitting on all the things that make me have like a visceral reaction about these things, because that's what's been so challenging for me in sort of the startup space, is that, I feel like so much of it is make believe, and it's really hard to feel secure in that. Maybe it's because I'm a scientist by training and like evidence-based, but it just feels very uncomfortable. And to have sort of this bravado to think that you have everything figured out, and to just kind of, I understand you need confidence, but it has to be balanced with, again, that sort of integrity and self-awareness of where you are to be able to ask for the necessary help. And we really talked about this on one of our last chats, is like, how do you balance that to be able to, understand when you are kind of maybe having some of those failures that are not necessarily like the world's ending, but you could use some feedback, and rather just ignore them, you could actually be working with people to figure it out, rather than pretend everything's fine and just keep going forward and making that money.
Yeah. I would say the one thing that we've always encouraged people to do is not get so tied to their original solution. That's usually when I start to see all of these problems happening, is that they, announce to the world that they're founding a startup and announce to the world that they're building this very specific solution. And to them, it's failure unless that specific solution works. And I always tell them, no, fully understand the problem, because if you fully understand the problem, you can come up with a million different solutions, and at least one of them will be good enough that you can build a business around.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so let's kind of flash forward in the future. Let's pretend that some of these are not pretend. Of course, this happens. There are companies that are successful. Yay for them. Lots of money. Good for them. And so, we have the obvious examples of things like Facebook or Uber or other companies that just kind of like take off. All right, so now that, maybe these founders are making billions of dollars, and some of them then turn around and start going into philanthropy and thinking about how they can sort of, give back. And so, this is something that I've really thought about as we started off with a different model to kind of distribute our wealth as we go. And not that one's necessarily right or wrong, but I'm curious your perspective, having sort of seen all these different things. For those founders that make billions and then decide to give it back through philanthropy, does that sort of equal everything out?
So this is super tricky because it depends. It definitely depends. The I would say the biggest problem is that a lot of the times these foundations started by billionaire tech founders, are incredibly powerful, even more powerful than public organizations on where they decide they want their funding to go and what issues they want to tackle. So I think before I get into too many details, I think that there is an inherent problem that exists when that you can decide you want to start a multi-billion-dollar foundation, and you have just a ton of power and influence over specific issues. So where it sort of depends is one, how did they get to being a billionaire? Was it royally screwing over massive populations of people? Because in that case, deciding that you, for example, and I will very openly point out the example of Jeff Bezos, of a man who, we're hearing all this news about how Amazon workers are treated and how Amazon workers are dependent on public aid for, a company whose founder is worth over $150 billion. For that to be a problem within a company that large is just, it's absurd. So for someone like that, I severely doubt that him deciding to start a $2 billion foundation is going to equal out what he's done. On the other hand, sort of the biggest example that people use is the Gates Foundation, which, I truly believe that they are doing good work, but it's taken them years of dedication to decide, to figure out how do we do things the most impactful way. So it really depends on, is that person, why they're doing this? Is it is because they want to clear their public image, or is this something that they're going to dedicate their time and energy to make sure that they're doing right?
Yeah, that's really interesting, like an atonement to all their wrongdoings. Yeah, and I think that certainly it's going to be different company to company, but thanks for kind of walking us through some examples there. So, we're talking about it in the sense of talking about companies and, which companies use integrity, or how should they be thinking about things? How do you and I think about it? But obviously not everybody has a company. And so why should people be thinking about how to even just live with and sort of choose integrity today? Any sort of individual. Why does that matter on a sort of a personal level?
Yeah. On a personal level, I've always had this belief that people do what you do. People do based on other people's actions. I could tell someone to do something as many times as I want over the course of an entire year, but they might not ever do it. They might be more willing to do it if I do it with them. The easiest example is me trying to get someone to go to the gym with me. And, I could tell them, you should go to the gym. But if I actually physically brought him with me and went with him, he is now there. He's now in the gym with me. So that's, it's people do things based on what they think is socially acceptable. And if more and more people decide to make decisions that are based on their integrity, other people are going to start to take note. And I would say that compounded with, to circle back to this discussion about technology, is that we're more and more put into the spotlight whether or not we want to be. Whether that be in our small group of friends that can easily take a picture of us and share a post about us, whether it's us deciding we want to take a picture of what we're doing. So those are more and more forces where someone's individual actions can very quickly and easily influence the decisions of other people.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way of looking at it. Just, if you want other people to do it, you kind of have to do it yourself. And I didn't even expect you to say that, but that's kind of what we're trying to do at Savvy as an organization. Is just, we keep telling all these companies to do the right thing, talk to patients, and make sure that you're valuing them. And so we're just starting with ourselves. It's like Michael Jackson told us to do that, right? Man, So hey, whenever I can have a song reference, I always will. But we'll get to that part of it to round this out. So you talk about like kind of going to the gym and having these kind of things. So just kind of give some people some like actionable things to try tomorrow as they kind of go back to work or back to their lives. What are some things that they can do to sort of choose integrity in what they do tomorrow?
On the simplest action, buy local. I think especially in America, your a dollar is a vote. So you can decide whether or not you want to purchase from a company that doesn't treat people well, or you want to support your community. So the number one thing is buy local. Go to the grocery store down the block from you instead of going to the Dwayne Reed that is, slightly closer to you. Interact with the people that you are purchasing from. Build, relationships even within your community. And then, sort of in the larger context of this is, I think a lot of people have a very clear mental separation between their professional values and their work values, and their personal values. So they will be working at a job where they don't believe in any of the things that they do all day. And then, at the end of the day, they have these different set of values that they follow their life in. I guess on a more actionable basis, start questioning how you are being forced to behave in a professional and personal environment in terms of whether or not they align with your values. And start really thinking about, if you were in a personal context, would you make the same decisions and the same actions that you did in a professional context?
I love that. That's great advice on both levels. That's awesome. Well, I can't wait for people to go and do that. And even for myself, I mean, we all have to just keep doing this and thinking about it every day. And it can seem exhausting, and sometimes it's the harder thing to do, but it's just balancing the hard things with the right things. So thanks. That's awesome discussion. So now on to our rapid fire questions that we always do. So just to get to know you a little bit better, when you're not helping others and being savvy in the ways that you are, what do you kind of do for fun?
Anything that involves going into nature. Yeah, just going to the park or going outdoors with friends. And I am a huge karaoke fan. So at the end of a long week, nothing makes me more happy than to be with a group of friends that I know and just sing very loudly.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Well, then we had a guest, Vanessa Mason, on a few weeks ago, who also told us that she knows all the lyrics to songs, and I feel that way as well. So we should all go to do karaoke sometime. That's awesome. All right. Well, does that count for something quirky about you, or do you have something else for us about something that people don't necessarily know about you?
Yeah, I guess to follow up on that karaoke note, for a couple of years, I wanted to be a musical theater actor on Broadway. So I'd actually tried out for Rent when they redid the off-Broadway one.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Wow, that's one musical that stuck in my head for I guess I was in like high school when it came out, but that was very influential. So that's awesome. All right. So I know that you're not necessarily specifically in healthcare, but as somebody who cares about the world, what do you think one of the biggest healthcare headaches or challenges that we have to address is?
Oh God, there are so many. I had a problem trying to nail it down to one. But I would say, just based on the conversations that I've had this week, fortunately with entrepreneurs who are trying to solve this problem, is really just a patient's right to making decisions about their own care and having that information to knowledgeably make decisions about it. And I would say specifically, just a lot of conversations that I had this week, women and the aging population of a lot of things that exist in the healthcare system, both politically and systemically, being men making decisions about women's health. And also more on the aging side, with an aging population, a lot of the times that those decisions are deferred to their family or their caretakers when they should be able to make informed decisions for themselves.
Yeah. Well, I know that our listeners will certainly empathize with both those and also get behind them. And hopefully we can still make some more progress. And I hope that you are working with some companies that are doing those things, because we have to solve them. All right, my last question, and my favorite question. What song did you pick out with a title that you think best describes the current state of healthcare?
Yeah, right before this, I went through my Spotify playlist and I found the most on the nose name for for a song. It's by Parliament
Okay.
on their latest album, which is also on the nose, Medicaid Fraud Dog, and the title of the song is called "I'm Gonna Make You Sick of Me."
That's amazing. Awesome. Well, then that's going right on our Spotify list tonight. That's awesome. I'll have to check out. That's really the name of their album?
Yes, yes, it 100% is.
Oh my gosh. They know that we're making a playlist. That's so funny. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. I think it really kind of exceeded expectations of diving into all these different little parts of integrity within, work, within your personal decisions, etc. So thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation. Before we close out, just kind of open it up back up to you. Is there anything else that you're working on that you want to plug that we can help, really amplify what you're doing?
Yeah. So, just in general, if you are an entrepreneur who is trying to figure out what tech looks like for your company, please feel free to reach out. You can check us at docollectively.com. But yeah, if you are a founder who is interested in talking about your story, similar to what I've just done, we do a lot of events centered around mission-driven founders. So if you're interested in telling your story to our community of designers, engineers, and fellow founders, feel free to reach out.
Amazing. And as always, if anybody needs to be connected with any of our guests, please feel free to reach out to us, hello@savvy.coop, and we'll be happy to connect you. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you again, Peter. Again, my favorite value, but we have one more in our series of our 10 core values, and that's coming up next week as we talk about how to elevate others, which is obviously a super important message that we need to be talking about. And we are excited to be joined by Terry Wilcox from Patients Rising to help us kind of understand how they do that and how we can all be better at helping to amplify others in this sort of quest to do better in this world. So thank you so much, Peter, for joining us. I can't thank you enough, and I'll let you say goodbye. And I appreciate all of our listeners listening in, and we will catch you next week.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Good night, everybody. Have a great Sunday.